Ankle mobility is one of the most important key performance indicators when it comes to mobility, being able to go through complete ankle extension as well as complete ankle flexion at command is basically an advanced mobility skill at this point. With most people not only struggling with ankle flexion to a degree where they can't even get their knees over their toes, but also when it comes to ankle extension for a lack of strength as well as flexibility in their tibialis and their calves and in their foot musculature. However, this is a huge problem, not only because our feet are the first point of contact with the ground, but also because the rest of our body has to align to whatever imbalances or lack of mobility we have in the lower joint. Meaning if your ankle mobility is really bad, chances are your knees and your hips will have to compensate for the lack of mobility. And over time, this will lead to all sorts of imbalances in your other joints, even though your real problem is only in your ankles at the very moment. So today we're gonna check out how you can find out how flexible or mobile you truly are in your ankles, what you can do to avoid injuries, and how to increase your range of motion, and how you can use your ankle mobility to benefit the rest of your body mobility. If you're ready, let's go and have some fun. Testing your dorsiflexion or ankle flexion capabilities. All you're gonna need for that is a wall or anything that is 90 degrees to the ground. We're gonna step closer with one foot, still leaving out enough space between our toes and the wall. And from here, all we need to do is push our knee forward as much as we can without our heels leaving the ground. Now, there are two things you need to be very careful about. Number one, if you have too much external rotation in your hip joints, your foot is gonna leave the ground and this is gonna falsify your results. The same goes for too much internal hip rotation. So you need to be very careful to align your knee exactly with your foot. Measuring the distance between your knee touching the wall and your toes will give you the exact amount of flexibility you have, or lack thereof. As for testing ankle extension, you can do that in a seated position, lengthening your foot as much as you can and pushing your heel forward. Now, if you can bring your entire foot into one line with your shin bone, chances are you're pretty good with extension and you don't really need to work on that. This will highly depend on your flexibility in your tibialis, being able to lengthen said muscle, as well as the strength in your toes, being able to go into this extension even if you're not using the ground for help. That out of the way, our second order of business is how much ankle mobility do we truly need? A very good rule of thumb is being able to get into two specific positions. With the first position being able to get into a complete ATG squat, which basically just means enough flexion for your feet to stay fully flat on the ground while you are seated in a resting or a deep squat position. And just so you know, that will be different depending on your body structure and the length of your levers, meaning the length of your upper thighs compared to your lower leg bone structure, your hips and where their sockets are placed. So for everyone that might be different. For me, it is my knees right above my toes. For some people it will be more, for some people it will be less. As for ankle extension, you should be very comfortably able to sit down on both of your feet while they are in a completely extended position without having any pain or having any sort of discomfort. Having tested our mobility and defined our goals, now we can go through the exercises you can work on to improve your own ankle mobility. Starting out with extension first, because in my opinion that's a little bit easier than the flexion part. Putting our focus on flexibility, since that will be the easiest part, all we need to do is get into an extended position in both ankles, just like so. You can bring your hands on the ground if you are truly tight in your ankles and start pushing your hips back from here. You should be over time able to sit down all the way fully comfortable. Now, level number one would be just pushing back just like so. You can keep your hands on the ground and you can take off as much pressure from your joints as you need to not feel any pain. Discomfort is acceptable, pain is not. Once you're able to fully sit upright in this position, now you can open up a little bit wider than shoulder width, and now we can increase that range of motion by pushing our hips even lower. You will notice that not only are we working now on our ankle extension, but we're also getting a nice knee mobility benefit as well without having to work on it directly. And this position is the easiest way to stretch and lengthen your tibialis as well as the backside of your foot musculature. However, flexibility is not the only thing we require. The musculature necessary for ankle extension is in our posterior chains, more specifically our calf musculature. By flexing our calves as well as our foot musculature, we are lengthening our foot, which means that we will be working on strengthening that same musculature. You can do this in a seated position first, raising your heel from the ground, rolling over your toes, flexing your posterior chain, and then stepping down all the way again. Then you can upgrade that movement by adding a longer range of motion, elevating your toes, as well as bringing your heels lower than the level of your toes. Pushing forward, flexing actively, stretching actively, and reversing the entire movement. Then of course we can progressively overload by doing the exact same thing in a standing position, moving up all the way onto our tiptoes in a standing ankle extension and reversing the movement, which are basically just calf raises. And finally, one of the most effective things you can do is adding a static hold. Stepping on any sort of elevation with your toes, bring your hands on the ground and start extending those ankles and move up on your toes, holding for 20 to 30 seconds, making sure that your ankles and toes are as lengthened as possible. And if you cramp up, you can move them back into some flexion to release some of the tension before you move back into this static position once again. And adding a bonus exercise that is going to benefit not only your extension but also your flexion, as well as strengthening our ankles and even our knee joints. I have used this exercise to rehabilitate my meniscus and my ACL as well. So a very amazing exercise. You're gonna grab yourself some sort of weight, a kettlebell, or you can even put a resistance band around your foot. And all we want to do from here is let the weight or the resistance band pull us into complete extension while bending our knee. And then we're gonna extend our knee and go into ankle flexion, strengthening our tibialis, which we have been stretching over the past couple of exercises, holding for a second or two in complete extension in our quads, as well as complete flexion in our ankles before we move back into ankle extension and bending our knee slightly. Pull in, extend, hold for a second or two, and release again. This might be one of the best, if not the best, ankle mobility and ankle rehabilitation exercise you can do. Having mostly taken care of our extension, both when it comes to flexibility as well as strength, now we can move on to ankle flexion. Unsurprisingly, our mobility test will also be our very first exercise. Step to a wall, and all we want to do from here is switch between ankle extension and ankle flexion, pushing forward as much as we can. And now with the last exercise that helped us strengthen our tibialis, we can actually flex the front musculature even more to pull us into an even deeper dorsiflexion in our ankle. Push, hold for a second or two, and reverse. If you're doing everything correctly, you should have the tiniest stretch in your Achilles as well as your calf musculature, and your tibialis should be flexed so hard that you can actually feel it if you grab onto it. Push back into extension, release some of the tension in the front, and push forward into flexion. Not only does this exercise feel really good around our ankles, but it's also very beneficial and very easy to replicate. Moving us to the flexibility part, even easier to replicate. All we're gonna need is some sort of elevation for our toes, just like so. And from here, we wanna push our heel down towards the ground. In this position, we're already going into a nice stretch in our lower insertions of our calves as well as our Achilles tendon. With the more flexibility you have, the more you can increase the elevation and push your heel down towards the ground as well as your knee forward the tiniest bit. And all it takes to upgrade this exercise, switching into a standing position and stepping forward with the other leg bringing our hind leg into a 90-degree angle to the ground. So now we don't only stretch the lower parts, but also the upper parts of our calf musculature and our hamstrings, which again is a nice bonus to have while focusing on our ankle mobility. And of course, the more flexible you become, the more you can increase the range of motion with this exercise as well. Just stepping on with your tiptoes and pushing your heels down. And now with all of our understanding of ankle extension, ankle flexion, which muscles we need to support, which muscles we need to strengthen and which ones we need to stretch, now we can put them together into an exercise that works both of those. One leg in ankle extension, one leg extended in front of us, and we're gonna push forward, just like so, into ankle flexion in one side, before we sit back down and put all of our weight on the hind leg. Push forward, ankle flexion, flexing our tibialis, pushing forward as much as we can, and then sitting back down, putting as much pressure as we can onto the extended ankle. And of course, we're gonna have to switch, moving the left side into extension and the right side into complete flexion. Push forward, hold, and reverse. With this exercise having an absurd bonus when it comes to hip flexor stretches as well, which a lot of people struggle with in general. In our second combo exercise, switching between a seated position with our ankles extended, bringing our hands down on the ground, our toes on the floor, and switching into a deep squat with full flexion before we reverse the movement and repeat it. If you are still a beginner, then you can use your hands to switch from here into flexion, rolling over your toes, sitting back down, and then using your hands once again to take off some of that body weight and sitting down. If you're more advanced, try bringing your hands behind your back and go through the exact same movements. Roll over your toes, back into a deep squat position, and roll forward over your toes, sit back down all the way. With the level in between, having our arms extended in front of us, which is gonna balance us out the tiniest bit more when we're switching into that deep squat. And one very amazing part about this exercise is that even if you do not have the mobility to get both feet flat on the ground, you can stay like this and still do the entire exercise, and you will notice the parts where you are lacking. If it is the flexion part, you can bring one knee down and start working on one foot separately. And if it is the extension part, you can just stay in this seated position for longer periods of time between doing the repetitions to get a little bit more extension out of it. And now, armed with this knowledge, you should be able to take care of all of your ankle mobility problems, which in turn are gonna help you with your knee and hip joints as well, if you have any imbalances that are stemming from your ankle mobility. However, with that said, sadly, once again, that's all the time I've left for you today. If you liked the video, like the video and subscribe, and please guys, check out other videos on this channel because we literally have new ones every single day. I will see you guys tomorrow. Captain Cairo, peace out.